Food waste and recycling are both hot topics. A big part of reducing them is finding new uses for waste. Edible upcycling is an ingenious way to convert discarded byproducts and convert them into new, higher fiber, higher protein ingredients. Welcome. Have you ever heard the term edible recycling? That's what this podcast is about. A lot of people today are talking about food waste and reducing our impact on the environment and on the planet. This podcast features a lot of those conversations. Today is no different. Today we're talking about edible upcycling. In other words, taking a product that was thought to be waste and turning it into something useful. Have you ever heard the story about those pressed logs, how they were developed? You know, those fire logs? I think this is a fascinating story, and it kind of helps frame this conversation. A lot of sawmills were just throwing away sawdust. It was in the way, and it was a problem. They had no use for it, and actually it was a fire hazard, and it was a huge problem for them. Well, someone had the bright idea that they could take it, compress it, and turn it into a log, or perhaps even building materials. Now, that story is kind of old, but I remember it was one of the first times I heard someone come up with a creative use for what most people thought of as waste. Think about all the things people recycle today: cardboard, paper, you name it. Well, in addition to focusing on recycling the waste that we create, why not find creative ways to recycle other products? For example, the grain that comes out of a brewery or distillery. My point is this: sometimes those products that we're recycling have attributes or characteristics that are unique and different from anything in the market. That's what today's story is about: finding creative ways to reuse or repurpose, or better yet, edible upcycling a product that was thought to be waste. A product that has a lot of attributes and characteristics that are really unique. For example, higher in protein, higher in fiber. Think about all the products today that are trying to make a fiber or protein claim. Well, here's a creative solution to dramatically impact those products. In other words, have more protein and more fiber than traditional counterparts. As always, thank you for listening. This show is about you and it's for you. In appreciation for your time, there's a free downloadable guide for you at the end of every episode. I always include one easy to download, quick to digest strategy that you can inside out and make your own. One that you can use to grow sustainable sales and compete more effectively with. Don't forget to go back and listen to previous episodes where I may answer some of your most pressing questions. You know, the things that keep you up at night? If you like this episode, share it with a friend, subscribe, and leave a review, so you'll be the first to get new brand building content as soon as it becomes available. Remember, the goal here is to get your product on more store shelves and into the hands of more shoppers. Now here's Dan with ReGrained. Daniel, thank you for coming on today and for making time for us. Can you start by telling us a little bit about yourself and your journey to where you're at today?
Sure thing, Daniel. It's always good to be on with another Daniel.
Yeah.
It'll get real nice and confusing for everyone listening. My name is Daniel Kurzrock. I am the co-founder and chief grain officer of a brand called ReGrained. What ReGrained does, in short, is we rescue overlooked, undervalued ingredients, and we develop new supply chains around them. We call it edible upcycling. Kind of two main functions of the business. Primary one is as an ingredient platform. So we work with breweries, and we'll talk more about that. We basically developed a really high protein, high fiber flour that can be used in all kinds of different applications, from savory to sweet. And then we use that ingredient, which we're trying to build a market for, in our own brand of ready-to-eat consumer products. So people listening may know us for our line of nutrition bars that are out on the shelves today. We have a line of savory puffs coming out soon, and some other products in the pipeline. And that's all geared towards getting people excited about a new ingredient, teaching them about upcycling and how fighting food waste can be actually a really delicious proposition. So that's a high level what we're up to. I'm pleased to be on the show.
Well, thank you for making time for us again. And so, how did you start this? I watched your video, and it was sort of the college kid's dream, making beer. What am I going to do with this excess waste? So what?
Yeah, a bit of a.
Go ahead.
Yeah, it was a bit of a harebrained idea in college. So I learned how to make beer when I was 19. For any international listeners, the drinking age in the U.S. is 21, and that it's perfectly legal to buy the ingredients to make beer. And so I was really excited by this concept, and started making beer every week. And every time I made a batch, there's basically four ingredients in beer. There's water, which is, everyone kind of forgets about that one. hops, which everyone kind of knows. That's kind of like the lead singer of beer. Yeast, which makes all the kind of magic happen, but then malt, barley, and that's what you use by volume the most of. So we were using about a pound for every 6-pack we would make. So take 5 gallons at a time, which is like a third of the keg. We'd have 20, 30, sometimes more pounds of barley that's basically just been soaked in water. And so I was making beer every week, and in doing so, generating this food supply that I was in Los Angeles. We didn't have a compost bin. We certainly didn't have a garden or farm animals or anything like that. And it felt really wasteful hauling this to the curb and basically tossing it. It felt like I was throwing away food. No one was talking about food waste at the time either. I mean, this was like 2009, 2010. It just made sense to me to try and do something with it. And so the original concept was just to have one hobby that would fund another hobby. So I would take the grain, I would make loaves of bread, sell the bread to friends, and then use the proceeds to invest in more ingredients to make more beer. So it's kind of like a circular, recreational
That's cool
business. Yeah, super, super fun. And in doing so, we started asking some of the bigger questions about what the industry is doing. This is right around when craft beer started taking off. Right now, there's more than 2 new breweries opening per day. At the time, it was really just starting to get going, and we thought, hey, what are the breweries doing with this? And is this really? The industry calls it spent grain, and that's a total misnomer because the grain is it's actually a concentration of all the protein and fiber. The breweries are just extracting the sugar, and so being kind of entrepreneurial college students, we tried to wrap our heads around why this business didn't already exist, and what our unique approach could be to seize an opportunity to build a business that can help make positive environmental change while also making a profit, and have that triple bottom line, including people, as well. So we grew from this hobby into what's now a much bigger business. We ended up working with the USDA. We worked with some very large brands. We've got our products in thousands of stores. And I would have honestly never predicted it from our roots of just making beer and asking questions.
I think that's amazing. So you're working with a lot of different groups like the USDA. How did that come about? And then how did you develop that relationship, and what do you do with those types of organizations?
Yeah, so when we think about the business that we're trying to build, it's almost, and it's become kind of an overused term, but there's truly this ecosystem, that needs to be of stakeholders that needs to be involved in this business. So, if you think about our supply chain is breweries. It's kind of like how the whey protein industry works with dairy processors, and that's where whey is made from. And then there's, in the food industry, all the way through to the end consumer. Right before that step, there's either the restaurants or the brands that are making the products. But then in between, there's also food product developers and ingredient companies and things like that. And we did the math pretty early on our whole goal is to close this loop. We estimate there's 20 billion pounds of this grain available in the US every year. And just by rough math, as a CPG company, if we were to achieve $100 million in sales, which, is no joke, right? That's a pretty successful company at that point. We would only be able to work with 1 or 2 breweries, maybe 3. There's just that much supply available. And so for us, we realized that in order to actually close this loop in the most meaningful way, we would need to be, it'd be best to become an ingredient company and to work with other brands and help build a new category of this. And so when we stopped thinking about ourselves as just a singular company, and if you think about it, maybe as like building a company is like building a skyscraper or something like that, as opposed to like helping support the infrastructure for a municipality. We need to engage people from different ends of that value chain and create shared wins, basically. So with the USDA, this was a very fortuitous thing that we discovered. That we're in Northern California, San Francisco, and Albany, which is basically Berkeley. They have a facility, and I did a grad school program for sustainable business, and one of my peers and close friends, he was doing a tour of this facility at the USDA, and it was related to the work he was doing at the time, and learned that they had a program around. This is pretty much a direct quote of what the program's called. It's turning sources of plant-based waste into novel ingredients. transforming sources of plant-based waste into novel ingredients, which is like a very academic way of describing upcycling, right? It's exactly what we're doing. And we had run into a scaling challenge operationally where we weren't really sure how we could stabilize the material coming out of the breweries at scale. It's a pretty volatile material. It spoils very quickly. And so we worked with them on something called a co-research and development agreement, which ended up yielding a patent. We developed a new machine effectively that makes it viable, for the first time, really to develop out the supply chain and build a market for a new super grain. And so that was kind of the nature of that partnership. It was, of all the things that have been most surprising in this journey, partnering with the U.S. Government effectively was probably the furthest flung from what I could have predicted. And it was a really wonderful relationship. It's called the ARS, the Agricultural Research Service. And, it's, I think, a really good example of how public-private sectors can, work together to do something meaningful. And, for us, that meant unlocking how we're going to actually scale this business and also ultimately protect the business, because we have patent, pending technology powering this whole thing.
So the fact that you're able to do that, first of all, kudos to you, hands off. I mean, that's really cool that you were open-minded enough to even consider going down this path instead of traditional, here's what you do because here's what your great-grandfather did, that kind of strategy. So, that's really cool that you're able to do that. So the patent that you've got, how does that work? Does that just incorporate the ingredients? And so anyone who wants to take advantage of this technology has to come through you? Or why is that important? And then later we'll talk about how that fits in with your branding strategy, et cetera.
Yeah, for sure. So what we're able to do and our vision for how we scale this thing is to deploy this machinery, this technology at the point of production, at breweries around the world. And so by having that protected, we can enter licensing agreements and things like that as we scale up. It doesn't make, because of this grain when it comes out of the brewery, it's extremely wet. It's very waterlogged, like 90% moisture, which is part of why it spoils so quickly. It also means it's heavy, which makes it not only difficult to transport, but more expensive to transport, right? And so we wanted to come up with something that would make sense to support our vision for how this loop could be closed. And the technology was an important kind of link and enabling that. And as it kind of ties back to the brand, our strategy for doing this is to be a branded, we're a branded ingredient. So we're developing the supply chain. It's not a commodity, at least not yet. So when we work with companies, they are marketing the fact that they're powered by ReGrained, that there's ReGrained inside, like a Intel inside for food, which is important for the end consumer. All of our brand assets around upcycled and ReGrained and are the way of communicate, because to the end consumer, people want products that taste great and that are also better for them and better for the planet. But with food waste, you also have this challenge of you want to communicate that value to them, but you don't want to yuck their yum, right? And you don't want to make them feel like they're eating waste because they're not, right? But you want them to understand that they're helping in the fight, against waste and more importantly, towards a food system that better values the resources that support life. So that's why we've kind of built a brand to develop that market, and then starting with our own products, and then co-branded products, and then eventually we'll wholesale ingredients at some point. But we're trying to be really thoughtful about how we build this this thing out, because it's it's a new concept for a lot of people. Although it makes sense once you explain it to them generally.
Oh, it makes a tremendous sense, and I think it's great that you're doing this. So the product, the what we would call food waste, my impression was that went to animal feed. Is that true? Because if that now is not animal feed, then what happens? What do the animals now eat? And how much of that got thrown away and did not go to animal feed?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And it's another reason why we don't talk about we try not to talk about it as much about it being wasted as much as finding the best use, so the highest value. And if you look at, there's something called the food recovery hierarchy. It's a pyramid, and at the top of the pyramid is feeding people. It's the best. So if we can, it's a similar argument for having a plant-based diet, right? Like if we can, instead of like growing the plants to feed, and there's like entropy in the system, right? If you eat the plants directly, it's less resource intensive. And it's a way to kind of keep nutrients directly within the food system. So there is a very rich history of this grain going to feed animals. With an urban brewery, that's sometimes less practical. But the majority of breweries are working with farmers. They're either donating it or selling it for almost no value. The reality, Daniel, is that there's so much of this supply chain that today it's not really impacting the ag sector and their ability to have feed. And frankly, there's a lot of things that are used for animal feed that could be used for human food as well. It's just a matter of thinking differently about it and deciding what we prioritize. So for us, upcycling is all about finding the highest possible use, the best value. It's about trying to align the food we eat with the planet we love in the most optimal way possible. And we believe that what we're doing, it ultimately creates net benefit for everyone.
Well, and the reason I ask that question is because just trying to drill down a little bit more. And personally, I'm not a fan of feeding cows things that they weren't designed to eat, which I think we do a lot of. And so different episodes.
I wasn't going to go there, but
well, no, I wanted to go there, and because there's this myth that we can feed a cow anything we want. Well, if we are what we eat, then what we eat matters. And if you're putting the wrong ingredients into the cow, the milk that you're going to get is different, unique, whatever. It's not going to be the same. I had Tim Joseph of Maplewood Creamery on, and he feeds his cow grass. Go figure. And yet his milk is unbelievable. It's amazing. I think a lot of the food allergies, etc., are caused by some of the things that we've done to our food system, including feeding animals things that they weren't designed to eat. Whole nother conversation. But what I was going with that is now you've got something that you've re-engineered. That's not the right word. That you've upcycled, and you're using it for a different use. So can you talk about the properties of the grain itself? You said high protein, high fiber. What does that mean in contrast to what people would normally use?
Yeah, it's a great question. So one of the things we did pretty early on was look up to see what sort of, we had access to all the university library systems and things like that, including like academic journals and stuff. And we found this wealth of nutritional science about how awesome as an ingredient this barley from the brewing process is or could be. Decades, literally, there's paper after paper about how nutritious this is, even some about how functional it can be in product development. Not a lot of papers about the flavor development stuff. We can talk about that. It's actually a really flavorful ingredient as well. It doesn't need to be masked or kind of hidden in any way. It's actually a really nice thing to feature. Chefs really like it. But so what we found was like, okay, so there's all this research about how great this is. It's basically most of the sugars have been extracted for the brewing process, so what's left is the protein, as well as dietary fiber and prebiotic fiber mostly, which is what the probiotics effectively consume. So it's prebiotic fiber is really important for digestive health, even though it's not labeled as dietary fiber. It's kind of a confusing naming convention. And there was this huge gap between this research and commercial application. So here's this ingredient that has this great story behind it. It's got great nutritionals behind it. And you've got food companies that want to make products that taste great, that deliver on nutrition, that, have a great, story. And there was, it's kind of the supply and the demand in that marketplace, if you think about it like that, wasn't really talking to each other. And so we've now done some of our own research as well, and especially on the different ways that it can be applied in recipes. And it's a pretty incredible ingredient. So compared to virgin grains, that are out there. The protein level is about double that of whole wheat. It's got something like 4 times the amount of dietary fiber as oats, just to give you an idea. I mean, this is a very nutrient dense ingredient that can be incorporated into recipes, on the lowest end, something like 10% of a formula, all the way up to much more than that. And it does a lot to, it can basically almost anyone that we work with, we unlock a fiber claim for them. So a good source of fiber, great or excellent source of fiber, depending on the recipe. And we like to talk a lot about fiber because most people eat enough protein, right? We're very obsessed with protein right now as an industry, but there's not, at least from a dietary perspective, there's not, people that are not getting enough protein isn't really a problem in the American diet, whereas almost nobody gets enough fiber. Like, Daniel, do you think you get enough fiber? How much do you know how much fiber you eat every day?
We eat a lot, an excessive amount compared to most people. So realistically, probably, I don't know, I would think like 40, 50 grams, which is probably a lot more than most people. However, to your point,
more than most.
Well, we go out of our way to do it because I understand exactly what you're getting at. Protein, and if you'll pardon the pun, is kind of like a sugar high. And I think, let me know your thoughts. So from my understanding, it gives you a lot of what you need in terms of your building blocks. It gives you the energy and stuff like that. However, without the fiber to go with it, that doesn't stretch the benefit of the protein out over a long period of time. It doesn't fill you up. You tend to want to eat more, etc. As a result, not having enough fiber is an issue. And as you get older, fiber is even more important. So what are your thoughts, or what have you learned? You said you've done some research around this. Am I right?
Nutritional science is definitely not my background. So as it relates to the building blocks and things like that, that's a little, I'm a lot of my depth on that. But what I do know for sure is that we're learning more and more about gut health, right? Digestive health and the impact that can have on everything. And, fiber plays a really, really important role in that. And the consumer perception of fiber is generally things like Metamucil and, supplements and kind of the geriatric market. And, the young people need fiber too. Everyone needs to eat fiber, and you should get a lot, whole fruits and vegetables, and whole grains and stuff are a great source. But it's, what we're able to, like, for example, our bar has 5 grams of fiber, in it, and you wouldn't know it. And so it's about, what's interesting is that we're trying to help, we're on kind of the early stages of the trend, around people, really seeking out, fiber and prebiotics, and, it's kind of heading in that direction. We're seeing a lot more like fiber gummies and things like that on the market that are geared towards, millennials and such. But it's something that we really want to help educate the market about, because fiber is an essential nutrient that pretty much almost everybody is lacking, right? Even people that are mindful of it generally don't know how much fiber they're consuming a day. And what we're able to do is take recipes that would maybe have no fiber and bring, a good serving of fiber to it, while making it, a better tasting product that also has a great story, and not that the protein's not important, and not that the other kind of nutrients going on aren't important, but generally, when you use our ingredient relative to other grains in a recipe, one of the biggest impacts is that you're going to see a significant increase in the amount of fiber on the nutritional facts panel.
Which is so important. So thank you for sharing that. Yeah. So what we do is we try to get over 10 to 15 grams of fiber per meal, and that's kind of how we do it. So, and the reason for that, like I said, it kind of stretches you out. It makes you less hungry, less often. You're able to go longer, further, etc. You were talking about some of the different fibers. One of the things, I think, to your point, that a lot of people look to the fiber in a container, which isn't the same. A synthetic fiber, etc. It's not the same. Earlier, if you made the point, you are what you eat. And so if you are eating the fibers that are synthetic, that's not going to do the same thing for you. Or actually, your point was, if you eat closer to the however you put it, to the grain itself, rather than eating something that's been processed, etc., then that's quite a bit different. So getting that rich dietary fiber in, the kind of fiber that's going to make a difference, not the kind of fiber that's just going to fill you up artificially, etc. Big difference. The probiotic fiber, I think, is interesting. Can you talk a little bit about that? How did you come across that? And what does that mean? And how does that impact a person? Or do you know?
Yeah, for sure. And just to clarify, so it's prebiotic
Oh,
fiber.
sorry, prebiotic.
So
Okay.
so there's prebiotics and probiotics. And if you think of your digestive system, your gut as an ecosystem, to use that overused word again, you've got your flora and your fauna, right? And the probiotics are the fauna. That's they're living organisms that do their go about their business in your gut. They consume prebiotic fiber, so it's also known as bulk fiber or non-dietary fiber. Basically means it's not it's insoluble, but it is effectively the food for the beneficial bacteria that lives in your gut. So it's kind of like tending the garden of your of your gut or something like that.
That makes
Which
sense.
sounds weird when you talk about it like that, but that's effectively the relationship between the two. There's different types of prebiotic fiber. There's not today something that's very easily measured in terms of like grams and things like that, but it's widely considered to be very important to get a lot of prebiotic fiber in your diet as well, not just dietary fiber.
Well, and on that note, I've talked to a lot of people that who've mentioned that, all these products that have pre and probiotics in them, they're great. But if we eat properly all the time, anyhow, meaning we provided that kind of nutrient source for that fiber, I mean, for those prebiotics, excuse me, then that would be healthier for us in the long run. So I think using
Yeah,
that,
you shouldn't. Yeah, you shouldn't need. Yeah, because you shouldn't need the probiotics if you're eating enough prebiotics.
exactly.
It's like, okay, yeah.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing. And that's exactly what I was getting at, is that if we ate properly, I remember years ago, before Better Living Through Chemistry, I'm older than you, so I remember that, where, if you ate properly, then you didn't need a lot of the supplements and a lot of the things that we're eating today to augment what we didn't get in the food that we ate. And the notion that we're eating synthetic supplements, or that those are out there to help augment what we ate, that doesn't make sense either. So you've got in
It's also just way more fun, right? To eat like delicious food
it
that
is. Well,
gives you the nutrition that you need.
and it's a lot less expensive, and you don't have to pay for expensive fees. Excuse me, but you know what I'm talking about.
Right.
So anyhow, as far as creating this product and being able to sell it, who do you sell it to besides yourself in terms of an ingredient? Who else buys this? Why would they buy it, etc.?
Yeah, so some of the stuff is under, that'll be released later this year, and I can't disclose the names of some of these companies, but we're working with large CPGs as well as food service, companies, which includes, restaurants. Some examples of local products that are coming out. We're in Northern California, and we're, working with kind of companies of all, various sizes at least, not just like multinational CPGs. We've got a fresh pasta in Northern California that's hitting the shelves right now. It's a really nice spaghetti that is ReGrained spaghetti. We've got a company that's a Market Hall Foods. There is North Bay Pretzel. They're doing a Bavarian style pretzel using our ingredient. There's a local bakery that is doing a really nice like hearth bread with it. So kind of there's a wide range of applications. Bakery and snack is kind of the lowest hanging fruit, if you will. And we've got some really exciting projects going that are going to have a much more meaningful scale, if you will, around, using this supply chain. It's very versatile. And we even have people that are working with it to make sauces, for example, replacing modified cornstarch. And, it's got some of the functional properties that can, that modified cornstarch, does to like thicken a sauce, but is actually, bringing more nutrition and also more, more flavor. It's kind of like if people who like that whole grain taste, especially like rye flours and things like that. It's on that spectrum. in terms of sensory. What it does to something. It's really aromatic. It's kind of got a nice toasted, roasted, kind of nutty flavor that it imparts. That we try to showcase. Our bars don't showcase it very well. The reason why we're making nutrition bars and and putting those on the market is because when we were in college and making loaves of bread, we wanted to come up with something that we could make more of that would have a longer shelf life, and we could make 100 bars in a home kitchen on sheet pans, cut them by hand, package them by hand, and we'd have inventory. And then that just became our kind of revenue generating marketing for the concept. And we're still making bars, and we're in Whole Foods and places like that with the bar, and it's a great product. But what it's not great at is showcasing the flavor, of the grain. And our puffs that are coming out are doing a much better job of that. And we're really excited for people to start understanding more what this ingredient can do. Whether it's a pizza crust that they're getting, their favorite pizza joint, in town, or if they're walking down the grocery store, and whether they're buying, cereal or chips or cookies, knowing that anything that's made with ReGrained is going to taste great and also be nutritionally superior to the alternatives on the shelf.
So when you're talking about
and make a difference.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. What?
Oh, I was gonna. It shouldn't be a footnote, I guess, but and make a difference, through upcycling.
Well, I think that's so critically important, and I mean that at the beginning, the origin of your story is fantastic. The fact that you are doing something to make a difference. When you're talking about the flavor, is that what you were talking about in terms of showcasing the flavor, the nutty, the roasty, et cetera?
Yeah, so that's what that's what's one of the really exciting things about this thing. A lot of times when you have an ingredient that's maybe it could be really nutritious or it could be really functional. And when I say functional, I mean how it from a product development standpoint, like what is it a binder extender, is it different things like that. Sometimes those products have challenges with flavor. They don't taste great. Our ingredient is ReGrained. We call it Super Grain Plus. So ReGrained, Super Grain Plus. It's plus is because it's not just the super grain; it's also better for the planet and all this good stuff. It's subtle enough where in a recipe that you just want to showcase the flavor, it doesn't overpower whatever you're making, so it can be something that's just kind of a nice backbone to the flavor profile, or it can be for example like a really nice hearth bread or the pasta where you really want to like showcase this flavor profile. That can be done too. So it's versatile in that respect, and that's something that product developers and chefs tell us they really like about working with our ingredients.
Well, that's exciting.
So we would have never known. We just were like, hey, there's a lot of this stuff. Let's try and do something with it.
Well, actually, that was going to be my next question: is what can you do with it? How do you use it, et cetera? So, am I getting ahead of myself by thinking that this could be a food source or a solution to the problem of homelessness and malnutrition around the world, or is that way far down the road?
Maybe it could be a part of the solution. What I really like to caution people against is conflating food waste and hunger. Like there's a lot of factors that go into what, and it's true that there's a large number of people that are food insecure, and I think the model for upcycling could be something that's used around the world to create new affordable food supplies. But it's not going to be the solution, for that. But to the extent that we can support, fighting waste or putting things to best use as a way of also feeding hungry people, it's something we're very interested in, especially internationally. Beer is brewed all around the world. Other beverages also have nutritious byproducts, and other kind of products have things that are currently byproducts that we can put through our process to develop new ingredients out of and ultimately create a more circular food system. So that's kind of what we're focused on first is closing these loops and building the market for it and helping food companies and product developers and such understand what they can make and how they might think about marketing it and things like that. And as we kind of progress forward through the phases of our growth, that's definitely something we're thinking about, but we're also careful not to try to claim that we're doing that, today.
Well, I was thinking of it more in terms of an aspiration. And what made me think of it, Daniel, is that you've got those peanut butter dense type products that people are using to feed and nourish people around the world. Well, here's another protein rich, fiber rich product, depending on its, whether or not you can, how long its shelf life or whatever, whole nother conversation perhaps. But it just seems like it might be a nice fit to kind of help augment what people are doing. And where I was going with that, exactly what you mentioned, is food deserts. There's so many food deserts in this country, and it would be great to have a product like this, maybe even as a cereal, which, by the way, I think it'd be cool if you guys came out with a cereal, because that would allow the
Yeah.
flavors to come out. But then also, then you'd have something that'd be shelf stable that might be able to help go into those different
Yeah.
markets, like a hot cereal or something you add water. I don't know. But just a
Yeah,
thought.
no, and even like a standard cereal, it's a great application. For like our puff, the puff is basically the same process as making cereal. We're just applying a savory seasoning to it and putting it in bags to snack on like a chip. But it makes a really nice cereal, and that's something that we wanted. We prefer to anyone who's listening who runs food companies. We're always looking for partners to develop these. We want to be we want to work together on bringing these things to market. And cereal is a great application, and any organizations also that are working to address food deserts or hunger things. Like, we want to hear from you, and we've got some ideas about how we might play a role in supporting that, and we're just really keen on collaboration.
I love that. In fact, I've actually got a couple companies I was thinking of right off the top of my head that I think might be a good candidate for something that you're doing. So we'll talk about that in a bit. So do you want to be an ingredient supplier, or do you want to be a branded product, or do you want to be both, or what do you want to be when you grow up?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both. I mean, so the ultimate vision is to be mostly an ingredient company. So most of our revenue coming from the sale of ingredients. But we're a branded ingredient. We're not selling commodity flour, for example. We don't want to be selling commodity flour. We don't. Maybe way down the line when there's more of a market developed, that's something that'll make sense. So yeah, I would say within a few years, like, most of our business will be focused on the ingredient. The thing with our own brand is it allows us to test not only product applications and kind of product market fit with that, but also messaging and build recall for this idea. And we can the reality too is that we can get to market with new products very quickly, whereas some of these larger food companies have established processes that can take 18 months, 2 years to get something from concept to shelf. And so it gives us a way also to commercialize things in the shorter term. Instead of having a guess-a-thon about what's going to work, we can actually test it by doing it.
So on that note, messaging, what are you doing about that? How do you get the message out? How robust is your social media, or how robust is your messaging beyond the brand itself, beyond the packaging, beyond the bar?
Yeah, something we care a lot about. There's always room for improvement. We're very vocal as thought leaders around, with the food waste movement. We're some of the first people to talk about, upcycling, as it relates to food. We actually have the term edible upcycling trademarked. We think it's a good way of conveying what it is. But we need to teach people what upcycling means, right, too. And so kind of off pack, we write articles. I do a lot of speaking and interviews and things like that to talk about what we're doing. Social media is very big, for us. And another thing that we try to think about, I don't remember who it was that said it for the first time, but it's this idea of operations as marketing. So I think to have really authentic marketing, it starts with having authentic operations. So being very transparent about our practices and getting things like B Corp certification, things like that. Because today, we believe that while every single person might not care about every single thing that we're doing, there is a group of people that cares about every individual thing that we are doing. And so when we bring intention to every decision that we make, and typically we're very, we broadcast it, and for those who that answer, we try to anticipate what their questions are going to be about, and try to show that we're not. A good example would be packaging, which is a whole can of worms that I'm happy to get into. We decided, the short of it is that we decided really early on that we weren't going to fight food waste and create packaging waste. And so we were first to market with a compostable, flexible film wrapper for the bars. And it's something we're really proud about. We talked about a lot. We ended up finding out that a lot of our products were going stale before they hit the shelf because they're in a hot truck and the moisture barrier on the film that we were using wasn't sufficient. And we had made a really hard call to switch to conventional film, to what everyone else is using, to protect the solvency of our business and kind of slow down to speed up and make sure that we can not create food waste in our efforts to fight packaging waste. And we were very transparent about that, very vulnerable about that. And it was a really hard thing for us to do, but it's just how we do business. Like we're here to do this authentically or not do it at all. And I think that, it's all, I kind of got a little rambly from your question.
No, that's fine.
But that's, I guess, a little bit, hopefully that shows how we're thinking about it. It's not just about coming up with a strategy and then executing that strategy. It's really about looking at every level of our operations and making intentional decisions, and then broadcasting those values.
I'm glad that you got in your as you said, kind of a little bit philosophical, my words. That's what I love about Natural Brands. So what I do as a side note is I help you leverage that story at retail. And so what I'm getting at as a founder, as a business owner, you understand that the objective traditionally is that you go raise money and then you spend a lot of money, you get your product on the shelf, and it's pay to play. It's really expensive. The reality is, as you mentioned, rightly so, there are a lot of people that will go out of their way to buy your product at a premium because of that authenticity that you have, because of that transparency. And to me, that's far more important. And any savvy retailer listening needs to understand that if they want to remain relevant, they need to cater to that new type of consumer that has the ability to go to Amazon or Whole Foods or Jet or wherever to buy their products. And if they want to remain relevant, then it's a lot cheaper to keep that customer, me, coming back into their store because they support the things that matter to me. They're your community base. So in talking to that, I think that that's really relevant and really important. By the way, as you know, the reason that we met is because I had the privilege of listening to you talk at the Climate Collaborative Summit at Expo West. You were talking about packaging and packaging waste. Yeah. So that was, right. I was inspired by that. That was really cool. So where are you in that journey right now in terms of packaging?
So we've got a few new films. So we participate in this group called OSC Squared. It's one step closer to an organic and sustainable futures, with the kind of full name of the organization is. And there's a packaging collaborative in it that we're one of the kind of leading members in. We describe ourselves as the guinea pig because we commercialized some structures that hadn't really been fully tested because we better or worse, decided that the most important thing is that we authentically, pursue our values rather than, come up with reasons to wait until to follow someone else's lead on it. We wanted to walk the talk because we don't really know how to do anything else. And so what we've done is, and part of the reason why we rebranded, I don't know if you've seen the rebrand, out there, it helps us set up to be able to transition back. One of the key things we had to do was remove the window from the product. And we've got some new structures, films, these wrappers basically that we've done the trials at the contract manufacturer. Now we're awaiting the shelf life studies, and we're going to do some extreme kind of temperature studies. But what we found was when this was in a hot environment, that's when our product was going stale the most. So we're going to actually put them through distribution, and ultimately, we have to actually, get it through the type of rigor that a shelf stable product goes through to ultimately get to the shelf. And so it's still going to be a number of months, maybe a year, before we switch back to a compostable structure. I hope sooner, honestly. If someone, and as soon as there's another proven structure that's out there, we're not proprietary about this. We think this is something that everybody should be at minimum pre-competitive, if not non-competitive about, because our industry is in the future trash business, and it's time, like CPG, consumer packaged goods. It is the packaging equals future trash, and that's something that can't continue. It's not okay, and we're hoping that the structures that we're testing work, and then we can kind of open source that knowledge and bring more people into the kind of tent of caring and of making the right choice. Because if it's just a few extra cents, a package, that's something that should be built into the cost of doing this business. So for us, it was never about, but it needs to work. The package needs to keep the product fresh. And unfortunately, conventional plastics, even though they're fossil fuel derived and landfill bound, they're not only cheap and abundant, but they do a really good job of keeping a product fresh. And these new structures that we're testing are really exciting and have a lot of promise. And we look forward to having more updates on how they perform through these various tests. It's the kind of that line that I said earlier, slow down to speed up. We're still in that pattern of the slowing down and making sure that we're doing it right. Because sure, if we fail again, maybe it'll tank our business or something like that. But more importantly, we don't want to be scaring people away from trying these new films. We want to be proving that they can work. And we think about the fact that it's actually only been not too many decades that plastic has been around as a thing, mm-hmm. right? It's like 60 or 70 years that plastic has been, around. And in that amount of time, we've managed to, there's going to be more plastic in the ocean than fish, pretty soon. And that's scary thought, right? And so let's do something about it. And as it relates to packaging, by the way, since I have a little soapbox going here.
No, go ahead.
Another thing that I think needs to get talked about more is upstream. So when we talk about plastic, we often talk about downstream, which by that I mean, is it going to landfill? Is it recyclable? Is it compostable? But upstream, by that I mean the supply chain. Conventional plastic is a petroleum product, right? And these compostable plastics are plant derived, and they can be regenerative, and they're and how they're produced, what the feedstocks going into them are. And a lot of people get really caught up, understandably so, in the downstream because composting infrastructure is lacking. People that do compost food scraps, and only a portion of those actually accept compostable plastics. Only a portion of those actually end up composting the plastics. Like, it's pretty. There needs to be more infrastructure developed. There needs to be some policy. There's like a lot that needs to happen downstream. And as food manufacturers, we can play a role in that, and we should be very active in helping advocate for and directly supporting, development of that type of infrastructure. But what we can make, I like to boil things down to like what we can do directly, what we can make decisions about that actually make impact. And we decide what we source upstream, right? And so at minimum, even if things are still messy with composting down the line, we can reduce our reliance on fossil fuels and use plant-based inputs. And I really want to start seeing more people talking and thinking about the whole value chain, not just the downstream.
I appreciate you going there, and I'm so thrilled that you did, because actually I was going to ask that question anyhow. So in the event that you were speaking at, which is what what brought us together, I asked the question, well, since a lot of the product that is compostable gets put into a waste system that doesn't understand the difference and it gets thrown in the landfill anyhow, then why are we trying to fix that? Or why are we waiting till some municipality does something or whatever? Why don't we take this and handle it? Where I'm going with that, Daniel, is this. I am a huge advocate for what you're talking about. I've had several of the leaders, the thought leaders for SA2 and the Climate Collaborative on the podcast. We've talked about this exactly. In addition to that, I have 2 free mini courses that I did in cooperation with Kelly Williams about this exact topic. The point is that you're right. We got to get this fixed and we got to do it now. And we need to stop making excuses and waiting, in my opinion, for somebody else to do something that accommodates something, whatever. Let's figure out how to do this. So, Earth digestible printer on demand packaging is something that I'm really interested in. I actually just put out a YouTube video about it, which is really cool. But also, that's the crux of those 2 mini courses that I put together in collaboration with Kelly Williams, Nature Slicks. When you, as you go through the study and you work on this and you start getting inputs and understanding what's going on, I would love to revisit this topic with you and know
Yeah.
exactly how it's working. So, from a layperson, this makes all the sense in the world that I could throw it away in my backyard, literally, and have it compost and get it digestible. I've actually got on one of the mini courses, actually on the YouTube course, YouTube video, they've got a video of the product actually being dissolved in over the course of time. But you've probably seen it. It's really cool. So everyone's got to check it out because it's neat the way you can see it on the side of the film. It's somewhat opaque, and within a couple of months, it's virtually gone. So I mean that's where we're
Right.
going. And to your point about the ocean waste and everything, so this is a huge focus of mine. I love the fact that you guys are taking a leadership in that. I've seen some of your articles. Again, I listened to that talk and a few other talks. What other things do you have that you want to share? And by the way, I think that to your point, every brand needs to take a leadership role in this. We need to stop kowtowing to the way big companies are doing things. The reality is that if P&G, Frito, Pepsi, it doesn't matter who it is, were to adopt this technology, the problem would be solved tomorrow, pretty much. But because it's these smaller disruptive brands that are taking a leadership role in fixing this problem, how do you recommend other brands get on board? How do you recommend someone like me that's trying to help educate people about that, broaden that message?
Yeah, a few comments on that. One, with respect to the big guys, some of them are actually doing some really good work. I'd love to better understand when some of their technologies will be available. But Pepsi, Frito-Lay, for example, they've been doing a lot of work on this structure called PHA.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really cool one. There's actually a company here in the Bay Area called Full Circle Bioplastics, Full Cycle Bioplastics. They can actually make it from like inedible food waste, and it's ocean degradable. It's kind of like the holy grail for flexible film packaging. It's not commercialized yet, but it's been in development for a long time. So what's frustrating is just how slowly things are going, and until recently, how little I feel most companies were willing to talk about the fact that they're generating so much trash today, and what they're trying to do to solve it. I don't want people doing this in silos. I think we need to be working together about it. So for the younger brands, and even just brands of any size, honestly, it doesn't have to be OSC squared. But could get involved with understanding what's available today and at least test your products in it to see if it works for your product, and start thinking about the economics of how you might make that switch. I hope we get to a point pretty soon where the consumers will ultimately punish brands that aren't taking a leadership position on packaging, that aren't doing something about it. We can't keep waiting, and individually we're not gonna. It doesn't make any sense to just do this in silos and have a bunch of redundancy of work and a bunch of people waiting and watching. And I think we need to, if anyone listening decides this is for them, no matter where they are. And actually in one of the articles I talk about kind of a call to action for different, whether you're a food manufacturer or a brand or a retailer. We need to talk about this more. Waste hauler, right? And so for the brands, it's about testing the latest structures and seeing if they work for their products. For distributors, great thing a distributor could do right now is help us test the distribution piece of it, and if they could even just like a pallet and in a truck loaded with products that are in compostable packaging that they'll drive across the country or something, and then send back, and we can test and we can see what they're doing to the product. For the retailer, there's a lot of opportunity to educate consumers in store about which products are made using sustainable packaging and which aren't. They could also be most people don't have compost in their home, and most municipalities don't either. So maybe there's a model for collection, of these materials, and where kind of the more centralized, industrial composting facilities can collect them from. But I think there's just a lot that everyone in the system can be doing, and we're all getting pretty good at admitting there's a problem finally. But I want to see more people, I guess, taking direct action and even taking some risks and trying to figure out the solution like we did. And it was a big challenge for the business, and it remains one. We had products, we have customers that had a bad experience with our product. We don't know who they are, or if they'll try us again, because we didn't know it, but our product on the shelf was stale, even though it was within the date code, because our product, dried out basically. And that was a hard thing for us to get through. It almost, could have easily destroyed the business. But I don't regret it. I think it was that we had to try it. We had to take action, on our ideas, or, we didn't. What's the point of being in business if not for that? And as we see it, and we think that brands will ultimately be rewarded, the ones that took that leadership position. And for us, it's not about intellectual property or anything like that as it relates to packaging. It's just about doing the right thing, and more importantly, doing something.
Exactly.
to not accept the status quo and rejecting that appeal to tradition of, things are the way that they are because that's the way that they've always been, right? Like let's move past that and create the future we want. And one thing that I've said in interviews before, I probably ripped off the quote from someone. I don't really know who to attribute it to, but it's like we put a man on the moon, right? Like we can probably figure out packaging.
You would think, yeah.
Just like,
well, and so to your point, Kelly and I got together because, again, this is a really important topic to me. And so we created a free mini course, and it was all about education. And then we listened to you talk at Expo West, and we listened to the other guy, I'm sorry, I don't remember his name, talk about the technology that you mentioned a minute ago about turning food waste into packaging, and a couple other people. And then we got together right after you guys left the room and decided that, hey, we need to do more. So that's why the second free video is free courses. And the point is that we talk about exactly what you just shared. Kelly brings up the point that if you put Oreos in a truck on a pallet and they rub together for a couple thousand miles, will that still look edible? Will it still look, will you still want to eat it? And then what does that mean, and why is that important, and how consumers buy products, and so on and so forth. And then where I come in is helping you leverage the strategies so that instead of being a commodity to the retailer, to the consumer, to the whoever, you're leveraging the fact that, like you said, it costs a few cents more to put your product in a sustainable, recyclable package, etc. And then you shouldn't be penalized for it. That should be part of your branding, your selling message, as opposed to something that we're going to penalize you for. And to your point, and I agree with you 100%, the brands that aren't adopting these strategies, or aren't thinking it forward, or aren't thinking about what their consumers want, they should be penalized. I mean, that's what a free market system is. And long story short, you've got a significant competitive disadvantage because you're small. And I want to change it. So thank you for sharing that. We've talked a lot about several different things in terms of the packaging, the ReGrained, etc. What have we not talked about that you want to cover, that you want to share?
There's just, we have covered a lot of ground.
We could go for a couple hours.
No, I think it's good. I just think it's, it's time that I just want more walking the talk, and as it relates to taking some of these sustainability initiatives to the next step. the things like upcycling are exciting, right?
Very.
There's a lot there, but it's not just that. I mean, there's like regenerative ag and soil health, and there's just a lot of impact that our food system can make, either positive or negative. And today it can be very, very negative, frankly. But even if you just look at food waste specifically, 40% of all food that's grown is wasted. Those are the estimates, which is a shocking number, right? And it's terrible. I mean, it's not a new problem either. If you actually, there's some great, I guess propaganda would be the term for it, from World War II, around fighting food waste as a national initiative. That it was important then, and it's it kind of didn't get talked about for a while because we had this period of like really just abundance, I guess. And now we're in this world where it's like basically it's like leaving a grocery store with 5 grocery bags and dropping 2 in the parking lot, and that's represents like 20% of all fresh water, and it's one of the greatest contributors to greenhouse gases and things like that. And for me, all that's really it's always been really shocking and terrible. But one of the things that we like to talk a lot about is how this actually overlooks a big piece of it as well, which is the what do you define? It's a linguistic thing. Like, what is food waste? So 40% of all food that's grown is wasted. That doesn't include edible, nutritious byproducts that could be going to best use. Like brewer's grain, that may be going to animal feed or to compost, isn't measured as a part of those food waste, numbers. And that's even just that supply chain from breweries in the U.S. alone is about 20 billion pounds. So we could make enough loaves of bread for every American to have like 34 loaves of bread, or something like 14,000 cookies each, from that amount of flour that we could make from that much grain a year.
Sign me up.
Right. So we really, we think upcycling is it's a new term for a pretty old idea. We think we know that it makes both dollars and cents, to be a little punny, and it's something that we would love to speak with anyone about helping them participate in that, not as the only way that anyone can make a positive impact, but just one one way that can start the conversation to what's more. And so, I think we've covered a lot of ground. It's important to me always to convey also that like ReGrained is not just a consumer packaged goods company, let alone not just a bar company. We will work with other bar companies. We will work with other packaged foods companies. We want to help develop a more sustainable food system, and that's why we're here. So I don't know. I could ramble on for a while, but that's what kind of, I guess, came to mind when you prompted me with that open-ended question.
Well, I appreciate your sharing that. Again, that's why this podcast exists. That's why I've been wanting to have you on the podcast. The focus here, this podcast, is about these technologies, about leveraging them, helping to change the world, one consumer at a time, one brand at a time, etc. For example, a couple of weeks ago, actually a couple of months ago at this point, a month or two ago, Walter Robb and I were talking about food waste. As a former grocery manager, I remember throwing staggering amounts of food away. We've talked about regenerative agriculture. We've talked about packaging. We've talked about all sorts of things on this podcast. More importantly, how do you leverage those strategies to grow sales on shelf? How do you not be just an ATM machine to the retailer, but take what you're doing and then go to the retailer and say, here's how I can help you grow sales by leveraging the strength of the consumer or the community around my brand. So thank you for sharing that. How do we get a hold of you? How do we learn more about ReGrained, the brand and the ingredient, and anything else you want to share?
Yeah, absolutely. So our website's just regrained.com. My email is just Dan, D-A-N, at regrained.com. I'm pretty easy to find. LinkedIn's also a good way to get in touch. Our products today are in places like Whole Foods, of course, online on Amazon, and, our website, as well. And so we're always looking for new retail, partners. We're not trying to go huge right away. We want to really grow sustainably. But most importantly, from the ingredient side, if you're a CPG company or, food service company that's that's interested in understanding, what ReGrained can kind of do or unlock for your products. I mean, that's what's really exciting for us is doing this together, and building something better together. So yeah, I'll kind of maybe leave it there, and we'd love to continue the conversation. As you can hopefully gather, like we're potentially to a fault, although I don't think so. We're extremely transparent about what we're doing, how we think about it, where we want to go, what the challenges are, things like that, and that's that's what you get with us. So hopefully that's something that's appreciative and can play a role in doing something meaningful.
I think that's great. I think it's so meaningful. Thank you for sharing that. I don't think you should ever have to apologize for it, by the way. And I know that's just sort of the way that the world is, that, look, we're trying to do something different or new or whatever. The reality is you're making a difference. And I celebrate that. And I celebrate you for doing that. And I would encourage people to come in and support you through buying your products, through learning more about what you're doing, by championing you. Long story short, by helping you do more good, you're helping us as a community, as an industry, as a society do better. So thank you again for all your efforts. Thank you again for making time for me today. And I look forward to our next conversation.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you so much, Daniel.
Thanks. Thanks for listening. I want to thank Daniel for coming on today and for sharing his story. What an inspirational story. Coming up with a unique and creative process that other people overlook. I love the transparency and authenticity in his message. Not only in his message, but what they're doing. Their commitment to addressing the issues around packaging, around climate change, around package waste, around food waste, etc. My hat's off to them. We need more thought leaders in this industry that are willing to step up and do more to help brands succeed. That's what this podcast is about, featuring and helping to amplify the story of thought leaders like Daniel. There's a link to ReGrained in the podcast show notes and on the podcast webpage. Today's free downloadable guide, the Essential New Item Checklist, the recipe for success. This is the foundation of every brand needs to be built on. If you don't have a healthy foundation to build your brand on, well, then it costs a lot more money to fix it than if you had done it right to begin with. The challenge is that these are the things that brands literally overlook. If you do this well, it's going to give you significant and sustainable competitive advantage. You can get this free download guide on the podcast show notes and on the podcast webpage. And you can get there by going to brandsecretsandstrategies.com/session 148. Thanks for listening, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.